Liz Truss's vote-thirsty tax cuts funded by increased borrowing show a blatant disregard for the UK's already stretched public finances. But if we are forced to sit back and accept the fact she will cut taxes, stamp duty is just about the single worst tax she could cut if she's trying to stimulate economic growth. It shows she has absolutely no idea what she's doing, and if she does know what she's doing, then it paints a much worse picture of what she is about. Her claim is that cutting stamp duty is critical to stimulating economic growth, but hopefully in this video I can demonstrate exactly why all other possible tax cuts, taking the fact that some tax cuts are happening as a given, stand a much better chance of growing the economy than reductions in stamp duty. I'm hoping you bear with me, as to illustrate my point I'm going to run you through a very basic model of an economy known as the circular flow of income. It's the first thing you learn when studying economics. Famously, people earn money working for companies, and these people then spend this money that they've earned on the goods and services of other companies. This is known as consumption. So we can actually measure the size of an economy by the amount of goods and services produced by companies in a time period. This is known as gross domestic product. Or we can measure the economy by the aggregate amount everyone has earned, gross domestic income. In theory, these should end up being the same amounts. In its simplest form, this economy has no leakages. Every pound spent becomes a pound earned by another person and spent again, and this pound infinitely circulates, forever lubricating the economy. However, in reality, we have leakages from this circular flow of income. Any money people decide to save in a bank account instead of spending, any money people, God forbid, choose to spend in another economy, I don't know, maybe they buy some French cheese. But also, most crucially to this case, taxes take money out of the circular flow. Fortunately, while money can exit the circular flow and go to banks, governments and foreign economies as described, these three groups can also inject money via investments, government spending and exports, respectively. Banks take the money we save and invest it in companies that want to grow. Governments spend the money they took off us in taxes wheresoever they choose to. And if a Frenchman comes over to the UK and decides to spend the money he's earned in France on our British cheese, well, that is a magnificent outcome. Any money that wasn't previously in the circular flow before is good news. Any injection not only has the direct benefit when it initially enters the economy benefits again and again with each time the money makes its way around. As shown, £10 injected into the economy, with a leakage of 10% each time, actually eventually becomes £100 of cash circulated overall. This is known as the multiplier effect. This is very basic economics, and as much as we care about injections, we care about leakages too, because reduced leakages have a similar effect to injections. They enable otherwise withdrawn money to circulate in the economy again and again. If this 10% leakage rate becomes 5%, the £10 goes from becoming £100 circulating to £200. Let's focus on the government's role here. In this context, tax cuts are a reduction in leakages, a good thing. Stripping out the politics of tax in reality, that is, we have no idea how well the government will spend our taxes elsewhere. Less leakage from the circular flow of income, thanks to these tax cuts, should, in theory, have a positive impact. So, in reality, what taxes can be cut, and where do these impact the circular flow? Income tax, including national insurance, is the biggest tax in terms of government revenue. People have money taken out their earnings. Before they can spend their earnings, the government has withdrawn some money from the circular flow. VAT is another big tax. It is a tax on consumption. As people spend the money by buying goods and services, they are implicitly paying the government to be doing so. Corporation tax. This is a tax on profits. One thing we didn't allow for earlier is that companies can make profits. That is, they make more revenues from selling their goods and services than they pay their employees. But these excess revenues aren't necessarily leakages from the circular flow. Profits paid out of the business ultimately still go to people, the people that own these businesses. So it still continues to be income in the circular flow. Even if it gets called a dividend, it ends up as money back in people's hands, and it can then still be spent. But corporation tax is a leakage at this point on the circular flow. Profits, before they can be paid out, are taxed by the government. So whether it's income tax, VAT, or corporation tax, holding other things fixed, a tax cut in any of these cases is potentially quite powerful. Again, if this 10% leakage rate becomes 5%, the £10 goes from becoming £100 circulating to £200. So that's the circular flow of income and how certain UK taxes impact it. But what is stamp duty? Well, it's a tax paid by the buyer when they purchase a house in the UK. So it's a tax that is dependent on house prices, as well as the level of activity in the housing market. Now, how can we think about the housing market in the context of this circular flow of income? It's actually most akin to saving. Rather than spending their earnings in the beautifully productive circular flow, people could in theory put that money aside, save up, and eventually buy a house outright with those savings. As it happens, people can't buy houses outright, so mortgages exist instead. A bank gives them the money up front to buy the house via a loan, and every month some of that person's earnings exits the circular flow of income as the person pays back the bank. But let's be clear, houses in the UK are not goods, nor are they services. The UK's houses are best classified as assets, so they sit separately to the circular flow of income. Now, real estate agents may provide services to the housing market, and house building companies may, at the margin, add to the stock of UK housing. And increasing the supply of housing is most definitely a good thing, which does add to GDP. But the 28.3 million privately owned homes in the UK are assets, and unproductive assets at that. The stock of UK housing has an aggregate asset value, a value which has soared over time thanks to low interest rates and a range of other factors. Altogether, our beloved residential assets are valued at £9.2 trillion. This is more than triple the size of the UK economy. Some argue there is a confidence factor or wealth effect related to the price of housing. The more your house is notionally worth, the more you supposedly spend. But the reality is very obvious. Any increases in the price of your house equates to zero additional cash in your pocket. Wealth gains are illiquid and cannot be spent. This is where Liz Truss's nonsense comes in. It has been proven time and again that stamp duty cuts and stamp duty holidays have one effect. They directly inflate the price of housing. The buyer that would before have paid 500k for a house and 10k in stamp duty now pays no stamp duty but must stump up 510k for the house. If we are pretending they could fund this in cash up front, what before was a 510k leakage from the circular flow is now still a 510k leakage from the circular flow. There is no new 10k in the circular flow, as there would have been with an income tax cut, a VAT tax cut, or a corporation tax cut. Here, instead, absolutely nobody wins. Even the seller whose house sells for an additional 10k than before cannot feasibly spend a single penny of this increase, since the house they are themselves buying will have also gone up by as much, if not more. So yes, no one wins. But crucially, Rishi Sunak's stamp duty holiday cost the Treasury £6.4 billion. An income tax cut of this magnitude should at least have put £6.4 billion back into the circular flow of income as cash into people's pockets, where it would then have circulated again and again. With a rate of 10% leakages, that would ultimately amount to £64 billion circulated. Even with a more realistic 30% leakage, that's still £21 billion circulating. Instead, no cash made its way into the circular flow as reductions in stamp duty were completely offset by a further inflated housing market. And this same effect will occur again with whatever stamp duty cuts Liz Truss will formally announce on Friday. The cynic in me feels Liz Truss actually knows this reality too. She knows it will have no positive impact on economic growth, but that it will pointlessly further boost house prices and please her wealthy home-owning voters. She is emptily wasting Treasury money to buy herself votes when the UK's public finances are already extremely stretched. As I've said, there is a more fundamental question as to whether she should be cutting taxes so aggressively in the first place, particularly since she is funding it with increased borrowing when borrowing costs are steeply rising and debt to GDP is so unprecedentedly high. We'll be going to the IMF before we can even make it to the next election. But if we are having to accept the fact she is cutting taxes as a given, then stamp duty is the single worst imaginable subject of these cuts. And if your vote can be swayed by this bribe that you can't even spend anyway, I'm afraid you are just as ridiculous.